It's been quite some time since we've been able to really get our plants outside. But today is a special day. The short days are over and the sun is slowly heating up the land. It's the 15th of May and that means no more frost. Hey, and what is going on, fellow dreamers? Welcome to the Farm Dream. Today, another day on the farm, and it's a special day because we don't have any expected frost coming up for the coming weeks. No more frost also means that we can start transplanting out all the plants. So I've been growing a lot inside over the last months and we've been talking about the last frost date, but now it's finally here. We're gonna plant out a few things: tomatoes, potatoes, carrots, and some other things. But first, let's get into why the last frost date is so important and how you can prepare for it. We just had some rain, so we went inside into the greenhouse, but I think it's pretty clear why we want the frost to be over. Firstly, because gardening is just more fun in a t-shirt, but mostly because loads of plants can't survive temperatures below zero. The moment the leaves freeze, the plants get damaged and they can stop growing completely, even though during the day it's still 21 degrees. And that's why it's so important to know your last frost date. Now, the last actual frost here this year was the 23rd of April, so technically we could have already planted our seedlings back then. But you can never be too sure. The weather forecast is always unpredictable, so best to wait till the frost is really over. Since we are transplanting on the last frost date, it's important that we keep track of the weather. I've checked the weather forecast and for the coming 14 days, there's no more expected frost, so there's a big chance we won't have any frost anymore. But be sure to keep on checking, because if there is any frost, you need to protect your crops. Now, these pointed cabbages went in a week ago and we added fleece on top. And the fleece is just to make sure that we protect them from any cold nights, just to make sure that they don't die off. Now, pointed cabbages can take the hit, but we're also protecting them from birds and from slugs with the fleece. Now, I've been busy preparing a few things over the last months to be able to transplant so many plants in one day. Firstly, of course, preparing the garden beds. A few months ago, I added this agricultural plastic over here to stop the weeds from popping up. That's the main thing, that weeds just don't get any light, so if they do pop up, they will die immediately. This makes sure that we don't spend any time weeding continuously on a bed where there's no crops in. Before adding the plastic, I've also added a layer of compost. We roughly added about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. This prepares the soil with loads of nutrients for when we transplant the crops in here. So these beds are pretty much ready. We're gonna take off the tarp and this is what we're gonna plant today. Next to the garden beds, I also went ahead and prepared a plan for the garden. This was quite some time ago, of course, because the garden is already well on its way and we've already planted out quite a few things. But it's really important to get a plan together. You can grow way more in a small space if you just have a plan ready and you know what to transplant, when and where. And lastly, I've prepared my labels. It's great to take out some time to write down what you are planting in the garden. I personally like to write down the sowing date and the transplanting date on the label to keep track on how my crops are developing. And this helps with my plan for next year. As an example, the tomatoes are growing inside. They are a little bit too big, so for next year we can start them a little bit later. And I now know when I sowed them and when I transplanted them. I'm going to start out in the greenhouse today, and more specifically with our tomatoes. As you can tell, these have grown way too big. These are cherries, a few different varieties. They've been growing like this underneath the growing lights, but they were just not getting enough light, so they've become a little bit leggy and not as strong anymore, but we're gonna get them in first. Now, I'm trying something new this year for the tomatoes, and that's stringing them up on a rope. Last year I used a fence and got some rope and attached it to the fence, but this year I have some special clips, and these clips attach onto the rope, and that way we can just secure it around the tomato and put the tomato in there. So I'm gonna try this. This is the first year trying it, so I'm not 100% sure if it will work. If it does, I will definitely let you know if this might be a method that is interesting for you as well. To get the tomatoes in, we're first gonna dig a nice hole here, and we wanna make it a little bit deeper than the actual cell over here. And I'll take it out for you to show, because these cells are actually quite big. You can see the tomato is already a little bit root bound in here, but we wanna plant it a little bit deeper, and all these little hairs you see over here will turn into new roots. So we're gonna plant it up to about the first leaf. Before we transplant the tomato, we're gonna put in the string and make it run underneath and put the tomato on top. This way, the string will be secured, and the more roots grow, the more it will be secured and the more weight it can support. All right, that's the plant in. We'll add a little bit higher, a little bit more compost here, and then we pull the string up and take it all the way to the top. And we'll secure the clamps in place, and now it's ready to grow to the top. Let's do all of them. We just added in all the tomatoes, and we had a big rainfall coming through, but it's now sunny again. I have a few tomatoes left, so if anybody lives nearby, send me a message on Instagram and let's meet up, and I will give you some. We added some beef tomatoes, yellow pear-shaped tomatoes, moneymaker, just the normal tomatoes, and then over here, filled up with cherry tomatoes because those are the ones that we use the most. Let's go outside and let's work on the tomatoes. Like I said, next up are our potatoes, not tomatoes. And we're just gonna uncover this finally now. And I'll just do the first bed only because this will be the bed for our potatoes. Now, I have to confess something. I did forget about them a little bit. Let me show you just the massive sprouting that's been going on. But we can still use these, and I'll show you a technique on how we can. Before we add in the potatoes, I just give my topsoil a light rake to open it up a little bit again. And then the next step is creating a few trenches. And we're just gonna go for 2 trenches in this bed. Potatoes should be about 30 centimeters apart in all directions. These beds are 75 centimeters, so we can easily fit in 2 trenches. We'll be planting out 2 different varieties of potatoes today. First gonna start with the Charlotte, then we'll do the Doré. The Doré has been sprouting way too much. These are actually still quite okay, so we can just put these in. Like I said, 30 centimeters or 1 foot apart. We're gonna plant them with the shoots up and then make sure that we go about 10 to 15 centimeters in depth. We're done with our Charlottes, and now it's time to move on to the Dorés. And these have been sprouted quite a bit, like I said, but we can still plant these the normal way. If they get even longer, it might be a good idea to plant them sideways and then move the sprouts to the top like that, so they will still grow towards the light. All these small sprouts here on the side will turn into potatoes, so make sure that those are underneath the soil, just to make sure that you actually get your potato harvest underneath and not above. Now, since my potatoes are not in deeply enough and I don't have too much compost on the bed left, we're just gonna add a little bit more. So I'm just spreading out some fresh compost on top of my beds and making sure that the potatoes go in about that 10 to 15 centimeters. The tomatoes and the potatoes are in, and now it's time for our favorite, and that's beetroot. First, I have to remove this tarp, and my plan was to just pull like a crazy fool and see if it works. We will be planting out these beetroot transplants. They've been in here for a little bit over a month, and I usually think that's the perfect time for beetroot. They have started to create their first true leaves, and they are ready to go outside. In order to get them in, I usually make some lines. So we'll add in 4 rows, giving them a spacing of about roughly 15 to 20 centimeters. Now, these beetroot are in the CD60 tray, the Charles Dowding tray, and this is actually new for us as well. So I'm doing a trial here in the back. The first row back here is actually Brussels sprouts, and all the way in the back we also have some red cabbage. I'm just testing out what can we grow in the CD60, and so far it seems to be that it's actually performing quite well. Let's plug out these transplants and put them in their spot. All the beetroot is in, and I'm not gonna water them right now because we have some rainfall coming up. Can't believe it with all this sunshine, but we do. So next up will be the carrots. I've got 3 varieties today that I'm gonna try out this year, and the first one is the Chantenay. It's a short, pointy carrot. The next one is the Nantes 2, a thick, strong, rounded carrot. And the last one is quite a funny one. It's Paris Market 4. And this is one that has small, tiny bulbs. And I'm just looking forward to trying this out. It's more like a snack. Now for carrots, since we have 3 varieties, we're gonna make 3 rows. And I like to make trenches and have a special technique for that. But first, we gotta set out some rope. Now, what I like to use is just some bamboo sticks and some rope in between. So we're gonna put it here on the border and run it all the way to the end. And therefore we have a perfectly straight line on which we can sow our seeds. All right, so that's our first line done. We're gonna do 3 of these. We're gonna space them about 1 feet or 30 centimeters apart. But before we do that, I just first wanna fill up the seed dispenser. I like to work with this. You don't have to, but this just makes sure that we don't spread it too thick. I see a lot of people online just going ham and spreading a lot, but then you have to take them out again and thin them out a lot. The seed dispenser is ready to go, but first we need to create a trench, and this is where I have a special technique. I like to grab a hoe, and it has a few sides, as you obviously know, but if we take a corner, we can actually just put it down next to the line and pull it back to create a trench. And we're just gonna go all the way to the end, and then we're gonna sow our seeds, and then we're gonna use the hoe again to fill it back up. All right, that's them all filled up, and now we're gonna grab the hoe again, and this time we're gonna tilt it upside down and just slightly pull back and thereby fill up our trench again. All the way to the end, completely covered up. Let's do the others. All the carrot seeds are in, and I know I said it's gonna rain, but I do want to water these in a little bit just to get the soil moist, so when it starts raining the seeds don't move around too much anymore. When it's moist, it's a little bit stronger and the seeds will stay in their spots, hopefully. And that was a day here on the allotment, the 15th of May, the start of the season. I hope you guys also go out there and start transplanting and enjoy the nice weather that's coming up in the following weeks. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you learned something new, maybe a few tips that you didn't know just yet. For now, leave a like, consider subscribing or even becoming a Patreon to support the channel and find more behind the scenes content. But most of all, don't forget to live the farm dream. Before we put in the tomatoes, I give up.